In this series, we're gonna be reproducing the following page by using Tailwind CSS framework. So let's jump right in. I'm going to switch over to Tailwind CSS website, open up section with installation instructions. In this case, I will use placeIDE installation method, which is not suitable for production, but for development purposes, this is the fastest way. So to integrate Tailwind CSS in the project, we firstly have to include Tailwind CSS script on the page. Let's copy over this whole code snippet, since we don't have the page yet. Let's jump into the editor. Currently, I don't have any files in the project folder, so let's create the template called index.html and paste just copied markup. And the most important thing on this page is the inclusion of this script, which is going to make Tailwind CSS work. Now, I'm also going to install additional npm package called live server that is going to automatically reload the page in the browser after we're going to make modifications to our template. So let's install the live server by using npm. Please note, I'm installing it globally to be able to use live server from within any folder in operating system. And then while being at the project root, I'm going to run live server that is going to launch the server and show us the address by which our page will be available in a browser. And if we're gonna see the underscored text, that means Tailwind CSS works. So we're gonna go section by section. Let's start from the very first one, which is this header with navigation and the logo. Let's jump in to the editor, and right here let's create the first section, which will be represented by the header tag. The first element will be the logo with the text. And down here I'm going to place navigation, which will be represented by the unordered list. Each list item will have link. The first link will be library, second one login page, and the third one will be sign up link. Let's check it out in the browser if all these elements are shown. Here they are. Now it's time to find an appropriate icon for the logo. I'm going to use hero icons. So right here, let's search for the code icon, and then let's copy over the SVG code of this icon and paste it in the editor, right above this span element. And after we make sure that this icon will be shown on the page, it's time to apply some styles to this icon. Before that, we're going to place an icon as well as the text on the same line, and for that I'm going to make parent element flexible container and position child elements in the center vertically, and the distance between child elements will be 2 units. And now let's work on styles for the icon. First of all, I'll increase the size of this icon. For example, let's use 12 units, and then I will rotate this icon a little bit and specify the text color, which will be indigo with a shade of 600. And right away I'm going to increase the text size of the project name and make it bold by using class font black. Then we'll have to move navigation to be placed at the same row as logo. So let's make this container flexible and position child elements in the center vertically, and the distance between all child elements, meaning that the distance between logo and the navigation will be 10 units. And to actually place all navigation items on the same row, I'm going to make this unordered list flexible container. Also apply items center class to position those elements vertically in a center, and add some space in between all those list elements, for example 8 units. Then we'll make it so that the first list item will shift the rest of items to the very right side of the parent element by using a more auto class that is going to apply margin right property with the value of auto, and then to make this navigation element cover all available space within its parent element, I'm going to assign class called grow. Now let's assign some styles to the individual list elements. The font will be semi-bold, and when hovering over this link, the text color should change and should be indigo with a shade of 600. And exact same classes we're also going to apply to the second login link in here. And as for the third link, it will be kind of unique because we're going to make it look like a button. So first of all, I'm going to add some horizontal spacing, let's say 3 units. The vertical spacing will be 2 units. The font will be semi-bold. We're also going to round the corners of this button. The background color of the button will be indigo with a shade of 600. The text color will also be indigo, but with a shade of 50. And when hovering over this link, the background color will be indigo with a shade of 700, a little bit darker than the original one. Alright, cool, we are almost done. Now let's add some spacing at the top and the bottom of this header. I'm going to use py4 class for this, which is going to add padding top and padding bottom and set it to 4 units. And just to position this container in the middle of the page, let's assign a max auto class to this div container. And with that, our header is ready. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. The next section we're gonna be working on will be this hero section. So let's switch over to the editor, fold this header section, and right here, let's create main section that is going to contain all other sections on the page. The first section will be the hero section. I'm also going to use the container for this section to restrict the width of the hero section. And as we've seen before, the hero section should contain 2 columns. The first column will contain some headings and the right one will contain an image. So I'm adding here 2 div elements that are going to be representing those columns. The first div is going to contain h1 element with the main heading as well as description represented by the paragraph. And down here we'll have to add a couple of links that will look like buttons. The first link will say explore and the second one will say learn more. And as for the right column, we're going to simply use an image element and specify the path to our image, which doesn't exist yet, but now I'm going to add it in a project. So the file with an image will be called editor.png, and here's how an image is going to look like. Alright, let's make sure that all necessary elements are shown on the page and get to styling those elements. So firstly, let's focus on the left side, which contains headings and buttons. We are going to apply a couple of classes to this h1 element. Increase the font size. Let's set it to 5XL. Then the font will be black. We're basically using maximum boldness, and the distance between letters will be tight. And just because we'll have to apply some additional classes to the VS Code part of this heading, I'm going to wrap this part into the span and assign additional classes. First of all, we'll have to add gradient to this name. So I'm using bg gradient to R class, meaning that the gradient will flow from the left to the right side. And then let's specify the first color of the gradient, which will be purple with a shade of 600. And the second color of the gradient will be indigo with a shade of 600 as well. And then to make this gradient to be applied to the text and not to the background, I'm going to assign additional classes such as bg clip text as well as text transparent, like so. And as you can see, the gradient is applied. Next, let's add a couple of classes to the description. I'm going to add some spacing at the top, 4 units. The text size will be a large, and the text color will be gray with a shade of 600. Alright, now it's time to style those buttons at the bottom. So, let's add styles to the first one. I'm going to increase horizontal as well as vertical spacing. The horizontal will be 8 units and the vertical will be 3 units. The text will be large. The font will be semi-bold. These buttons will be round. And the background color will be indigo with a shade of 600. the text color will also be indigo, but much lighter with a shade of 50. And when hovering over this link, the background color will be a little bit darker. Let's say indigo with a shade of 700. And almost the same classes we're about to apply to the second link, but just because this second link has to be gray, I'm going to change those classes responsible for colors. So in here, we're using BG Gray 100 to make background color gray. Then we'll use text gray 900 to make text color dark gray. And when hovering over this link, the text color will be gray with a shade of 200. And just because later on we're going to add another section on this page with an identifier of features, we'll make this link to scroll the page to that section. So in here I'm specifying an identifier of that section in this href attribute like this. Alright, cool. Now that we have those buttons ready, I'm going to make this whole wrapper flexible container and increase the distance between child elements. In our case, those child elements are the block with heading as well as the block with an image on the right side. And this way we're also going to position both of those elements on the same row. Next, let's also add some spacing to the section itself. For example, let's use 28 units as paddings from the top and 48 units as paddings from the bottom. And just to make the wrapper with an image to always cover 2/3 of this parent container, I'm going to use w-2/3 class like this. We are also going to position all the containers in the middle of the page, so let's use mx auto class. This way our hero section will be exactly in the middle. Also, let's align the block with headings and buttons in a center in relation to an image. And to do so, let's use flex and flex call classes. And then we can align the content in this flexible container in a center by using justify center class, like so. And finally, let's round corners of an image and add some shadow to Excel. And here we go. The hero section is almost done. There is only one piece missing, and that is the reflection of an image that we're gonna be working on next. So what about this reflection that we are seeing behind this image? And to add this reflection, we're going to customize Tailwind CSS classes a little bit, and particularly add a couple of new classes. So for example, we're going to add class called hero image that is going to be applied to this image element. And just because we have earlier included Tailwind CSS on this page as a play CDN to customize Tailwind CSS, for example, to add new classes, we can do the following. I'm going to create style tag in here with a type of text, Tailwind CSS, and right here let's use directive called layer. In this case, I'm going to place newly created class in a layer called components. The class is called hero image, and this one is going to contain only one CSS property called transform, because we're going to rotate an image a little bit. Let's specify the configuration. So we're going to rotate an image around the x-axis by 5 degrees, around the y-axis by -10 degrees, and around the z-axis by 2 degrees. And just to make this hero image class complete, without having to apply any additional classes to this image element, I'm going to move this around to Excel as well as shadow to Excel classes directly into hero image class. We can apply those same styles provided by those classes to this hero image class by using apply directive and specifying class names, like so. As you can see, my VS Code is highlighting that apply directive. It cannot recognize this directive inside HTML file. So to remove that highlighting, I'm going to create .vscode folder within the project root with one file, settings.json. And just to disable that one inspection, I'm going to use unknown @roles property and simply ignore it. And after doing all that, we're about to see that our image will be rotated a little bit. But of course, this is not the final result. The main thing here is to add a reflection behind. So let's do it right now. This reflection will be represented by another div element with a class of hero reflection. There will be a custom class that will be defining right now. So following the same technique within that components layer, I'm going to add hero reflection class that is going to have transform property with almost the same configuration as hero image class. But in addition to all those rotations, we're going to add scale. So the element to which we're going to apply this hero reflection class, its size will be increased by 10%. And just to make that reflection to actually look like a reflection, we're going to add the following classes. Absolute to absolutely position the reflection behind an image. Then we'll also round corners of the reflection and apply a gradient to the background of the reflection that will be directed to the bottom left corner of the reflection. So the first color of the gradient will be indigo with a shade of 200, and the second color will be pink with a shade of 200. And of course, in order for the absolute position of this reflection to work properly, we'll have to make the wrapper element relatively positioned by using class relative like this. And now I'm going to specify how exactly this reflection is going to be positioned. So we're going to shift this reflection to the left by 20 units and from the top by 10 units in relation to an image. And just like that, we're seeing that our reflection has appeared. But so far it does not look exactly like our example. We're also going to apply perspective CSS property. And to do so, let's add additional utility class that I'm going to wrap into utilities layer. For example, let's call this class perspective 1000. And the CSS property that we are about to use in here will be called perspective with a value of 1000 pixels. And the result might not be that obvious. Let's try to use 2000 pixels first. And after applying this class to the wrapper element in here, let's also scale this wrapper element a little bit to make it bigger by 10% from the original size. And as of now, the result is not that obvious. So let's temporarily assign value 200 to this perspective property and see what is going to happen. And now we're seeing that the right side of an image is kind of closer to us than the left side. So applying 1000 pixels in this case will be enough for us. And then let's also add some paddings from both sides of container elements, and just to position those containers in the middle of the page by default, instead of always having to specify additional class mxAuto to position it in a center, I'm going to apply some configurations. So to extend or redefine some configurations of Tailwind CSS, we can use the config object. So in here, I'm going to define some overrides and assign it to config object. Specifically, we need to configure container element to make it always be positioned in the middle of the page. We can do so by using center property with a value of true. And to add paddings to all containers by default, I'm going to use padding property. And from now on, we no longer have to use that mxAuto class anytime we'd like to position container in a center, because this behavior is going to be applied by default. And after doing all this, we're seeing our final result. The next section on our page is this features section. We'll start working on this section with adding these headings. So in the editor, I'm going to add another section inside the main element, right below the hero section, that will have a wrapper for heading elements. Let's add h2 heading as well as description that will be represented by the paragraph, and use arbitrary text. Right away, I'm going to apply some styles to this text. For example, let's increase the text size of h2 element, set it to 4XL, the text will be bold and positioned in a center. And also I'm going to position in a center this description, add some spacing at the top. The text size will be large, and the color will be gray with a shade of 600. And as you can see on the page, our new section has appeared at the bottom. But for now, the description is kind of stretched, but I want to make it so that it will be shown in 2 rows. To do so, let's make this div element container, and to restrict the width even more, I'm going to use max w screen sm class. That is basically going to make the width of this container smaller. And right now we are seeing that the description text is wrapped and shown on 2 lines. Next, we're going to be working on the first feature card. So let's get back to the editor and create wrapper container for all those cards. And by the way, those cards will be clickable, so I'm going to use links. And inside, we're gonna use article element with header as well as paragraph elements. The first feature will be settings. In here, let's add some text as a short description of this feature. And then I'm gonna go and look for an appropriate icon to put in this feature card. I'm gonna use this cog, so let's copy over this SVG code and paste it on the page. Right here, I'm going to increase the size of an icon. Let's say the size will be 12 units, and the text color, meaning that this icon color, will be indigo with a shade of 600. Let's remove this extra clause in SVG tag and check the result. All the elements are appeared. Then let's just make the description of this card a little lighter. I'm going to use text gray 600 class. And as for this heading element, we'll increase the text size, make it bolder, and add some spacing at the bottom. Or actually, we can add this margin directly to the header element in here. Or add margin top class to the description, like so. We could use any of those approaches. And just to be able to control the distance between the icon as well as the heading, I'm going to make this header flexible container where elements will be flowing vertically. And to assign the spacing between child elements, I'm going to use gap-y3 class. And overall, this section doesn't have enough spacing from the top and the bottom, so let's add a couple of classes to the section element. We're also going to make this section flexible container where elements will flow vertically, the distance between elements, and in this case, those elements are the block with a heading as well as the block with feature cards. We're going to make the spacing between these elements 12 units, and the paddings from the top and the bottom of this section will be 16 units, and the color, background color of this section will be light gray with a shade of 50. And just because we need that Learn More button to scroll us to this features section, I'm going to add an identifier with a name features, because this identifier we have used before inside an href attribute of this link. And this way, while clicking on this Learn More button, we're about to be scrolled directly to this features section. Let's try it out. I'm gonna click on the Learn More link, and right away we are scrolled. Of course, this features section should contain 3 features in a row, and we can achieve it pretty easily by using grid classes. So let's turn this div into the grid and assign 3 columns to this grid, and the spacing between all those columns will be 8 units, horizontal spacing as well as vertical one. And now to make all those features to look like a real cards, let's assign the following classes. We're gonna make background color of those cards white, round corners, add border. The color of the border will be gray with a shade of 200. Paddings from all sides will be 6 units, and when we're gonna hover over the cursor on those cards, the border color will change and be indigo with a shade of 600. And also let's make these cards to cover all available height of its parent link by using hfull class, and there we go, we made this card to look like as we need to. And now all we have to do is to actually duplicate the markup of the first card and paste it a couple more times to add additional cards. So let's do it right now. We are also going to replace icons in all of those cards, as well as text of the heading and a description. So I'm going to use the icon with a name fire for the second card. Let's copy over any SVG code of this icon, paste it onto the page. Let's not forget to also assign these classes to make this icon bigger and use appropriate color and remove an old icon. At the same time, we're also going to change the text of this heading. In this case, it will say keyboard shortcuts, and change this description. And finally, let's go ahead and find an icon to the third card. In this case, I'm going to use puzzle icon. Let's copy SVG code and paste it onto the page and replace an old code of an icon with this new one, while also applying proper classes to this icon to increase the size of an icon, as well as change the text color. And as always, let's use proper copies for the heading as well as description. And there we go, we got another section of the page ready. Let's move on to the next section on our page, and that will be newsletter section. So let's collapse all other sections in our markup, and at the bottom create new one. Here I'm going to add div element that will be a container. Let's also restrict the width of this container by using the following class max w screen sm, just like we have done for other elements on this page. And then I'm going to place heading of the second level in here, as well as short description. Now let's add a couple of classes to style those headings. Here I'm going to increase the font size. It will be 4XL. The font will be bold. And let's position this text in a center. Also, let's position the description in a center, as well as add top margin. And increase the font size. We'll make the font large. And the text color will be gray with a shade of 600. Alright, as we can see, the new section has appeared at the bottom, and now we're going to add some spacing at the top and the bottom of this section by using the py16 class. And next, what we're gonna do is we're going to add all necessary elements to create this form with one field. So right here, let's create an empty div that is going to contain form element with one input element, as well as one button to submit that form that will say subscribe. So just to give a user some hint as of what should be entered in this field, I'm going to add a placeholder with your email text. And now we can go ahead and apply styles to the button to make it look like a button and match styles of other buttons on this page. So I'll start with increasing horizontal as well as vertical spacing, and then let's make font semi-bold, round corners of this button. The background color will be indigo with a shade of 600, text color will be indigo but much lighter, and when hovering over this button, the background color will be indigo with a shade of 700. Alright, cool, now that the button is ready, it's time to work on styles for the input element. So for this, I'm going to use another Tailwind CSS plugin, which is used to simplify styling of form elements called forms. This plugin is going to reset all default styles of input elements, as well as give us an ability to easily customize input styles by using Tailwind CSS classes. And just because we are using Tailwind CSS as a place CDN, by including script tag, in this case, to install the forms plugin, we just have to specify additional parameter in this address like that and specify the plugin name that we'd like to use. So all I have to do is to basically copy this portion of this URL and paste it in the script address of the Tailwind CSS. And right away we're seeing an effect. The styles of an input element have been changed. Now I'm going to add additional styles to make it match the rest of styles on this page. So let's round corners of an input element by using a rounded LG class. We are also going to use gray border with a shade of 300. The horizontal spacing will be 4 units. The vertical spacing will be 2 units. Then we'll also add shadow behind this input element. And when focusing this input element, the border color should become indigo with a shade of 600. And also we'll add thin outline to this element when focusing, and the width of this input will be 96 units. And there we go, we're seeing an expected result. Now I'm also going to increase spacing between input and the bottom. And to do so, let's turn this form element into flexible container, where child elements will be positioned in a center. And then to increase the spacing between child elements, I'm going to use gap x2 class, like this. Then just to match width of the container with a heading inside this section, I'm also going to apply container class to this wrapper of the form. And to be able to control the spacing between the heading as well as the form itself, I'm going to make this section flexible container where elements will flow vertically. And we are able to increase spacing between all child elements by specifying gap y12 class, like so. Well, let's actually assign less spacing than this. I'll set 8 units. And just like that, we have finished another section on the page. Alright, now it's time to work on the last section on this page, and that is a footer. So we'll start adding this part to footer first. At the bottom, right below the main tag, I'm going to add footer element, where I'm going to place another container. And before actually adding any content inside this element, let's make background color of the footer indigo with a shade of 900 and increase paddings from the top and the bottom. From the top I'm going to use 10 units and 8 units from the bottom. Next one, we're going to use logo with a project name, just like we have done inside the header. And for that reason, I'm going to copy all the markup of the logo from the header and move it inside the footer right here. But of course, it is not going to look great at all because colors have to be changed. So I'm going to use white color for the logo and the text itself. And to do it, I'm going to add text white for this element as well as for this span element. Then there should be a little description right below the logo that I'm going to add right now by using this paragraph element. And then I'm going to assign spacing from the top. And the text of this description will be indigo with a shade of 200. I also want to make the width of the container with this description 80 units, and that is why I'm adding max w80 class to this element. Let's also add flex class to the wrapper element, because later on we're going to add a couple more lists into this footer, and we want those lists to be positioned at the same line with the logo and the description. Alright, so let's start adding markup for the first such list. In here, let's create a couple of div elements and add h3 heading that will say popular playlists. The list will be represented by the UL element that is going to contain a link. Later on we're gonna style this link, but first I'd like to assign classes to the heading element. Let's make the font semi-bold, decrease the font size, make it small, letters will be uppercased, and the distance between letters will be a little bit wider than the usual one, and text will be white. Then as for this link, I'll make the text color indigo, and when hovering over this link, the text color will be white. And then just to make this list to be shifted to the right side of the footer element, I'm going to assign mr auto class to the wrapper, which wraps logo with a description. And this way it's gonna push everything that comes after this block to the very right side of the footer. And actually, I forgot to specify the shade for the text color right here. It will be 200. So now let's add a couple more links to this list. I'm going to duplicate this list item a couple more times. The classes that are going to be assigned will be pretty much the same as for the first link. And then to be able to control the distance between all these list elements, I'm going to make this list flexible container, and elements will flow vertically. Then we can also assign gap-wide to class to add some spacing in between all those list items. Alright, that is looking good, but we also have to increase the spacing between the heading and the list itself. So we're going to make wrapper element flexible container as well, and elements will flow vertically. Then we can assign gap-wide for class to specify the distance between heading and the list element. And the styles for this list are pretty much ready. We can just copy over this list and paste it a couple more times to add additional lists. So let's do so right now. In the second list, I'm going to change the heading on configurations, as well as change the text of all list items. Here it will say settings. The second link will be keyboard shortcuts. And the third one will say code snippets. Then let's add the same list one more time. This is going to contain social links. The heading will say social, and then the first link is going to lead to the YouTube page. The second one will be a Telegram link, and finally the third one will lead to the GitHub page. And to add some horizontal spacing between all those three lists, I'm going to assign flex class to this wrapper element and increase horizontal spacing between all child elements, set it to 16. And that is looking good. There is one more element that is currently missing from the footer, and that is this text. Please note that there is also a slightly visible top border, so let's add another div at the very bottom of the footer with that text. And now I'm going to firstly add top border by using border T class and specify the color for this border. It will be indigo with a shade of 800. The padding top will be 8 units. Text will be centered and smaller than the default size. And the text color will be indigo with a shade of 200. There is also another thing that we have to add to make this footer look better, and that is the spacing between footer lists as well as bottom text. So let's add classes flex and flex call to this container element, and then we can control the spacing between child elements by using gap classes. In this case, I'm going to make vertical spacing 8 units. And now that we are done with all that, we can finally apply the font globally. So I'm going to open up Google Fonts webpage and look for the font with the name Open Sans. Right here, I'm going to copy over this code snippet to include this font on the page. So let's get back to our code, and right here, inside the head element, I'm going to add the title, which should say Code Editor, and right below the title, I'm going to paste that code snippet. And then to globally apply this font family by using Tailwind CSS, all we have to do is to modify this configuration object and specifically use font family key and assign an object with the key sans, where we'll specify the desired font family. In this case, it will be Open Sans. And there we go, we are done working on this page. So eventually what we have got in our markup is this. We got the header section at the top, followed by the main section with 3 more sections, with hero section, feature section, and newsletter section. And at the very bottom we have footer section. So all main areas of this page are clearly separated. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Let's start working on a second page of this project. Here we're gonna show a list of playlists with filters. And the filters are going to contain input field to search for playlists by its title, as well as list of tags. So I'm simply going to duplicate the file with the markup of the main page, index.html, since we're going to use the same header as well as the footer on the playlists page. So in here I can also remove those classes that have been used to style image inside the hero section on the main page, that also have been used to add reflection to that image. But on this page we don't need those classes, so I'll remove this block, and then let's just collapse header and footer sections and remove everything from the main section. Let's just open up this page in the browser. I'm going to specify page name in the address line, playlists.html, and there we go. We're seeing the header as well as the footer, just like we expect. So now it's time to start adding markup for this page. In here, the first thing that I'm going to do is to add the main heading as well as this description. So inside the main tag, let's create the new section, which is going to contain the div with container class. Just as a reminder, this container class is going to restrict the width of this element and position all the content in a center. So this block is going to have the h1 element with paragraph that is going to contain description. Then I will quickly add necessary copies. The heading will say playlists and the description will be the following. Now let's start applying styles to those elements. So I'm going to increase the font for this heading, set it to 5XL. The font will be bold, and let's also center the text inside this heading. And as for this description, I will increase spacing from the top, set it to 2. The text will be large. We're also going to center this content in the middle of the page and make the font gray with a shade of 600. As you can see, all those elements are shown on the page, but I would like to restrict the width of this container even further in order to have this description to be wrapped and shown on 2 lines. So I'm going to use class max wscreen sm on the container element. It is going to set particular width on this container. And as you can see, after doing this, description spans 2 lines. Now we're going to get to adding this filters section. So right here, I'm going to create another container that is going to be served as a wrapper for filters. The first element inside this container will be an input field, search field to search for playlists by title. We are also going to specify placeholder text, saying playlist title. And then I'm going to turn this whole wrapper into the grid with 4 columns, where block with filters is going to take up 1/4 of the total width. And as a reminder, in one of the previous lessons we have installed additional Tailwind CSS plugin called Tailwind CSS Forms to reset all default styles of input fields, and that is why by default this input field has this look. But I'm going to add additional styles in order to match the rest of styles on the page. So let's increase horizontal spacing, set it to 4. Vertical paddings will be 2 units. Then we're going to add some border, let's say gray with a shade of 300. Then we're going to round corners of this input field, as well as add shadow. And when focusing this input field, the color of the border should be changed on indigo with a shade of 600. And also when focusing this input field, we will see small outline. And there we go, the input field is ready. Now let's add some text at the bottom. So right here, let's create another div and the heading that will say text. The text will be large and font semi-bold. Right down here I'm going to add a list with text. Each li element of this list will contain button with tag name. Then I'm going to duplicate the markup of the first li element a couple of times just to make sure that all these elements are shown on the page. And right after we're gonna start applying styles to the first element. So I'm going to stretch this button within the li element so it covers all available widths. The horizontal paddings will be 3 units, vertical ones will be 2 units, the text will be small and positioned on the left. The color of the text will be gray with a shade of 600. We're also going to round corners of this button, and when hovering over this button, the background color will be changed on gray with a shade of 100. After this, I will duplicate the first li element of this list and paste it a couple more times just to have the same styles for all those li elements. And then let's just increase spacing between all those list items. I'm going to turn this UL element into a flexible container where elements are going to flow vertically and the vertical spacing between those elements will be 1 unit. And almost the same classes I'm going to apply to this wrapper just to increase spacing between text heading as well as list of text. In this case, I'm gonna set the spacing to 2 units. And finally, to add vertical spacing between input field and the wrapper with text, I'm going to make this wrapper element flexible container where elements will flow vertically and the distance between input field and container with text will be 6 units. And this block with filters looks much better now. So we also have to add some spacing from the top and the bottom of this whole section. I'm going to make this whole section flexible container where elements will flow vertically. Vertical paddings will be 16 units from the top and from the bottom, and the distance between child elements will be 12 units, and that is the distance between the container with heading and the description, and block with filters. And the last thing that I'm going to do in this lesson is I will replace those repeated tags and use unique ones. So there will be a lot more text on this page. Right after I will do that, the page is going to look like this. As always, link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. In this lesson, let's continue working on the playlists page, and we're going to focus on the right side of this page, specifically those playlists blocks. Right away, I'm going to create a wrapper element for that container with playlists. The playlist will be represented by the link because it is going to be clickable, and within this link I'm going to place article element with some basic markup. So right here we're gonna put header with a heading of the 3rd level, then there will be a description of the playlist, and down here I'm also going to use footer with a list of texts that are assigned to a particular playlist. So let's increase the font size of this heading and also make it bolder. Then I'm going to add some description and a couple of texts inside this UL element. Alright, now that we have added all necessary elements within the first playlist block, before adding styles to this block, I'm going to change grid configuration a little bit, so the filters block covers a little bit more space. Let's make this grid to have 3 columns instead of 4, and the column with filters is going to take up 1/3 of the total widths, and the section with a list of playlists is going to take up the rest of free space, which is 2/3. And the distance between filters block and playlists block will be 8 units. Now let's work on styles for individual playlist cards. This is the look that we are supposed to achieve. Also, please note that when hovering over this card, the border color will be changed. So let's get to it. I'm going to make this article element flexible container where all child elements are going to flow vertically. Let's also set maximum height to this article element in relation to its parent. Then I'm going to increase paddings, set it to 6 units. Add border of the gray color with a shade of 200. The corners will be rounded, and when hovering over this block, the border color will become indigo with a shade of 600. At the same time, I'm also going to style block with a description. Let's increase the spacing from the top. I'll make it 2 units. The margin from the bottom will be 6 units. And the color of this description will be gray with a shade of 600. And let's check the result. Now I'm going to add styles to the text that are contained inside the footer element. We also have to move the footer element to the very bottom of its parent container. We can do so by applying margin top with a value of auto like this. And then I'm gonna make those tags inside the footer to be positioned on the same line that are also going to be wrapped when there is not enough space on one line, and the distance between all those tags will be 2 units. And as for individual list items, I will set horizontal paddings to 2 units, vertical ones to 1. Then I will decrease font size of these elements. The font will be medium. The color will be indigo with a shade of 600. This list item will be fully rounded, and the background color will be indigo with a shade of 50. Alright, after doing this, let's replace the second list item with a new one, already styled. And there we go, we were able to achieve the desired look for this card. But now we have to position 2 cards in one row. So let's turn this whole wrapper, which contains playlist cards, into the grid with 2 columns. And the distance between all child elements is going to be 4 units. And now we're supposed to see that each row in this grid is going to have 2 playlist cards. But just because we have only 1 card in our markup, I'm basically going to duplicate the markup of that playlist card couple more times and change content of those cards, and eventually we're going to get the following result. That is looking pretty good. Now let's try to remove that empty auto class from the footer of the last playlist card and check what it is going to result to. And in this case, as you can see, when the description of one playlist will be longer than the description of its sibling, footers in those cards will be positioned in different levels. So to make them all be positioned at the very bottom of the parent container, I'm going to get back that class empty auto, which is going to make all footers with text be positioned on the same level at the very bottom of its parent element. And that's actually it. We have finished working on the second page. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Alright, let's start working on another page in the project, and this page is going to show individual playlist, its details, as well as list of lessons that belong to the current playlist. And just because we're also going to have the same markup for the header as well as the footer on this page, I'm going to duplicate the playlists page, rename it on playlist, and right here we're only going to remove everything that is contained inside main tag, because the rest will be the same. Only the main content will vary from page to page. So now if I'm going to refer to this page by its name, playlist.html, we're supposed to see the header as well as the footer without any content, and that is exactly what we are seeing. So now let's start working on individual parts of this page, and the first thing that I'm going to add will be this heading as well as description. And by the way, this heading with description is very similar to the one that we have used on the previous playlists page, so we can just copy over that part of the markup responsible for showing this heading from the playlists page and paste it onto our new page, playlist.html. And of course, the heading text will be different, so let's just replace heading text as well as the description right here. Alright, that is looking good. Now let's continue with adding markup for the left part of this page, where we're gonna show list of lessons. So let's start with adding the wrapper for this element, where we're gonna put a couple more divs with a heading inside of the third level. This wrapper will be a container just to restrict its width, and the heading will say lessons. Right below the heading, we're going to show a couple of links where we're gonna put icons. So let's find some icons on the Hero Icons website. For the first link, I'm going to use globe icon. Let's copy over this SVG code and paste it into the first link in the editor. And then let's go ahead and find an icon for the second link. In this case, I'm going to use code icon, this one. So let's copy this SVG code and paste it into the second A tag. And right after doing this, as we can see, all the elements are shown on the page. Now let's start positioning those elements in proper places. As the first step, I'm going to make this whole wrapper flexible container because we need all those elements to be positioned on one row. And then I'm going to align those elements vertically in the center, and just to put those elements as far as possible from each other within its parent container, I'm going to use justify between class, and the minimum distance between child elements will be 4 units. This is horizontal distance. And while we are here, let's also add a couple of classes to the lessons heading. I'm going to make font semi-bold, increase its size a little bit, and then let's make wrapper with links flexible container as well, because we need those links to be shown on one row, and the distance between those icons will be 2 units. And there we go, all the elements are shown on one line, but of course for now the width of that element is not restricted, so it's stretching all the way from the left to the right side of the page. But before fixing that, I'm going to get back to the editor and add a couple of attributes. The first one will be target with a value of blank, because I want that after clicking on this link, we're gonna get new browser tab opened. And when hovering over this link, I'd like the text color to be changed on indigo with a shade of 600. So exact same classes I'm going to apply to the second link right here. And just to increase size of those icons a little bit, I'm going to change size 6 classes on size 8 on both of these links. And now it's finally time to actually restrict the width of this left block, so it will just take up 1/3 of the parent container. And to do that, I'm going to make the parent container grid with 3 columns. And then we want the first child element, which is that block with list of lessons, to take up 1/3 of the total width, and that is why I'm applying callSpan1 class. And now we are getting the proper width for that left block. In the next lesson, we're going to finish working on this block and switch over to working on the right part of this page. So now it's time to add list of lessons. Let's switch over to the editor and create UL element right here with one li item for now, where I'm going to put the name of the first lesson of the current playlist. This will be a link because this lesson name should be clickable. And actually I'm going to put one more element inside this A element. So let's wrap the lesson name within span element, and right next to this one I'm going to put another span with the duration of this lesson. Of course, there are no styles applied to those elements yet, so let's start adding classes to make those lesson items look like this. I'm going to make font medium for this name and truncate the text, because if this name will be too long, I would like to shorten this name and have an ellipsis at the end. The color of the duration will be slightly lighter, gray with a shade of 500. And then I'm going to make this link flexible container to position elements in a center vertically. And just to put both of those elements as far as possible from each other within this container, I'm going to apply justify between class. Then we're going to stretch this link so it covers all available widths within its parent element. The paddings will be 3 units. The text of the color will be indigo with a shade of 700. Let's also round corners a bit. The distance between child elements will be 4 units. And background color will be indigo with a shade of 50. Alright, that is looking good. But actually let's remove that text gray 500 class that applies color to the duration. I prefer to keep it the same as the color of the lesson name. Now let's increase the spacing between heading lessons as well as list of lessons. And for that let's make this wrapper flexible container where elements will flow vertically and the vertical distance between child elements will be 4 units, for example. So as you can see, the spacing between lessons, heading, and the list of lessons has been increased. And now let's see how it is going to look when we're gonna have more than one list item on this page. So let's duplicate the markup of this first list item, paste it a couple more times. And as you can see, there is actually no space between those list items. And to add that space, let's make this UL element flexible container with elements flowing vertically, and the spacing between those elements will be 1 unit. That will be enough. It looks good. And by the way, when we're gonna hover over on inactive list items, we need the background color to be changed on gray, as well as text color to be changed on gray, but with a darker shade. So I'm going to replace a couple of classes on inactive links. So in here, I'm going to use text gray with a shade of 600, and when hovering over this link, the background color will be gray with a shade of 100. And then I'm going to copy over all these classes that are applied to this link and use exact same classes on the last link right here. And as you can see, when hovering over those links, the background color changes on gray. Now before getting to work on the right side of this page, let's just change the content of those list items. I'll just replace lesson names and durations. And after that, we are ready to switch over to working on the right side of this page. So right here, the first element we're about to add will be this video player. This will be an iframe, and the code for this iframe we can copy over from any YouTube video. I'm going to paste this embed code right here next to the block with a list of lessons. Of course, we're gonna have to stretch this video all the way to the end of the parent container. So let's just make this wrapper to cover 2/3 of the width of the parent element. And remember that the parent element is a grid. So the first element in this parent container, which is a block with list of lessons, takes up 1/3 of the width, and the second block will take up 2/3, and the distance between those blocks will be 8 units. And as you can see, the distance was increased, but the video is not stretching to the end of its parent element. So to fix it, let's apply W full class to this iframe element that is going to make this video stretch to the end of this parent element. Then I will also apply aspect video class and round corners a little bit. And by the way, this aspect video class is going to apply the following CSS property. So the ratio between width and height of an iframe will be 16:9. And we are getting desired result. It's time to add description of this lesson right below this video. So let's create markup first. I'm gonna use article element, where I'll put header with a heading of 3rd level, as well as paragraph to contain description. And then let's just paste arbitrary text inside the heading element, as well as description. And instead of actually adding classes to individual elements inside this article element, let's assume that this markup will be dynamic and it can come from any storage, for example, database. And in this case, we're not going to be able to apply classes directly to those elements. So what I prefer to do instead in this case will be using typography Tailwind CSS plugin that allows us to quickly apply markup to some text that uses different tags. And the way it works is basically this. We only have to apply class called pros on the parent element, which for example stores markup of an article or a blog post. And this way, all the different elements, including headings as well as paragraph and links, will be styled properly, so we don't have to worry applying classes to individual elements. And to use this plugin, we of course have to install it first by using npm, but just because we're using Tailwind CSS as a plain CDN in this project, meaning that we have included it by simply adding the following script. And to add plugins, we can just mention plugin names that we would like to include in this plugins param. We're already using one plugin called forms, so let's just add another one called typography. And this is all what we have to do in order to use this plugin. Alright, let's firstly take a look at the description. As you can see, it is completely unstyled. And now let's see what is going to happen once I'm going to apply a class called pros that is provided by that plugin we have just included. And right away we're seeing how individual elements such as headings as well as paragraphs have been styled to have a proper look for an article. But if you're not satisfied with some of these styles applied to individual elements, you can always override those styles of individual elements. For example, in this case, I would like to reset margins of the H3 elements, and to do it, I'm basically using the following class that starts with prefix pros, followed by the element that I would like to override the styles for, and then colon, followed by the class that I would like to assign to those elements. And by applying these two classes, I'm basically assigning margin 0 to all H3 elements and margin top 2 to all P elements within this element. It worked because the space in between video and the heading element disappeared. So I'm going to apply it in a different way. Let's make this container flexible, where elements will flow vertically, and the distance between child elements, which in this case those child elements are block with video, and the article itself, the distance between those elements will be 8 units. And finally, if you will look closely, you will notice that the width of the article is not stretching all the way because the right side of this element is not aligned with the video. And to fix it, we can basically reset maximum width of this element by applying max wnon class, like this. So now this article is going to cover all available widths. And that's about it. The third page is also ready. Link to the source code will be in the video description. We are about to start working on the registration and authentication pages for our project. So right away I'm going to duplicate markup of one of the pages right here. Create the new file register.html that is gonna be the template for the registration page. On this page we're not going to use class container, so there is no need for this configuration. I will remove it. And unlike all other pages where we have kept header as well as the footer, on this page we're not going to reuse those elements. So besides removing everything from the main tag, I'm also going to remove header with a footer. So basically I will remove everything from the body element. And once we're gonna open up this page register.html in a browser, we're not going to see anything. The page will be completely blank. So the registration page eventually is going to look like this. Let's start adding elements onto this page, and we'll start with adding the logo. Right here, let's create the main element with a section where we're going to put our logo. And by the way, this logo can be copied from another page. I'm going to take up markup for this logo from here and paste it onto register page. We're also going to slightly increase the size of this logo on this page. Let's use size 16 class. And just to have all the elements positioned directly in the center of this page, I'm going to make this main element grid. And by applying place items center class, all the content within this grid will be positioned right in the center. And also let's make the background of this page light gray by using class bggray50. And right under this logo, we're going to place a card with a form for registration. So let's add all necessary elements. At first, we're going to add only one input field that will be an email. And here we are connecting this label to the input via an identifier. Let's also specify the text for this label, which is an email. So everything is looking good so far, but the content is not yet aligned in the center of this page, and that is because we have to increase the height of the main element. Let's make it so it will be equal to the total height of the page by using minHScreen class, and this class is going to add minHeightCSS property with a value of 100 VH units. Then we're going to make this section flexible container where elements will flow vertically, because I would like to increase the distance between the logo as well as the card with a form. So I'm specifying 6 units width between those elements. Alright, cool, now we are seeing that this content is aligned in a center. Let's get to styling the card with a form. So for this element, I'm going to increase paddings, set it to 6 units. The background of this card will be white, and this card will also have the border of gray color with a shade of 200, with rounded corners, and the shadow behind. And the width of this card will be 96 units. Then let's get to adding classes to the label and the input field. First of all, I'm going to add a couple of classes to the wrapper of these two elements. We're gonna make this one flexible container where elements will be positioned vertically and the distance between child elements will be 1 unit. And as for this label, we're going to make the font medium and the color will be gray with a shade of 600. For this input, I will specify horizontal paddings 4 units, vertical paddings will be 2 units, the border will be gray with a shade of 300. Then let's also round corners of this input and add slight shadow behind. And then when focusing on this input field, the border will change color on indigo 600. And also when we're gonna focus this input, there should be small outline. And there we go. Let's also focus if the outline appears when we're gonna focus this input field. As you can see, it works. Next, I will just duplicate the markup for the first input field couple more times, because in total we're going to have 3 input fields in this form. The second input field will be responsible for inputting password, which is why I'm also changing the type of this field on password. And also let's change this label, as well as the label for the third field. Here we'll say password confirmation. The type of this field will also be password, but an identifier will be equal to password confirmation. Next one, this form is going to look much better once we're gonna increase the distance between every input field within this form. So let's make this form flexible container where elements will be positioned vertically. And just to increase the distance between every input field, I'm specifying class gapy6. And there are a couple of elements that are still missing from this page. First of them is sign up button. So let's add markup for this button right here. I'm going to add button tag with the following classes. The horizontal paddings will be 6 units, vertical ones 2 units. We'll add top margin 2 units. Then let's make the font semi-bold. The color will be indigo with a shade of 600. That is background color for this button. And then let's round corners and the text color will make indigo with a shade of 50. And when hovering over this button, the background color should change on indigo with a shade of 700. Alright, cool. We can see sign up button with proper styles. And the last element that still has to be added is this label at the very bottom saying already have an account. So I'm going to add p element for this text. And besides this text, we're also going to place a link to login page inside this paragraph. We're gonna make the font of this link medium. The color will be indigo with a shade of 600. And the color on hover will be indigo with a shade of 700. And the classes for this whole wrapper will be the following. We're gonna make top margin 8 units. The text will be small, positioned in a center, and this text will be gray with a shade of 600. And that is looking great. So at the end, I will remove one of the plugins that we had been using before in a different template. In this case, we don't need to use this typography plugin on the register page. So let's remove this name from the list of plugins of this address. And just because the template for authentication page will be pretty much similar to the registration page, with the only difference that this template is going to contain only 2 form fields. There is no need to use password confirmation field on this page. So let's just duplicate the markup of registration page. The new page will call login, and then I'm going to go down right here to the password confirmation page and remove this field. We're also going to change the text of the button that submits this form. In this case, I will use login. And also down here, let's slightly change this text. Already have an account. And change the text of this link. Sign up. Before finishing this lesson, let's take a look in the browser and see how our login page looks like. Just like we expect to, almost the same as registration page, but only with 2 fields, a mail and password. And with that, we are finished working on the login and registration pages. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. In this lesson, we'll start working on the mobile version of this template, because right now, if we'll activate mobile mode, we'll see that this page is completely broken on mobile devices. And eventually we're going to get this result. This is how this page should look like on mobile. Please note that there is also mobile navigation right here. So let's open up the template for this page, index.html. And we'll start with hiding the navigation. This navigation is supposed to only show up on screens that are a little bit bigger than small mobile devices. I'm going to find the markup for that navigation. It's this now tag. And we're going to apply class hidden, which basically hides this navigation. But starting from small screens, this navigation will be visible. And that's how we are working with responsive classes in Tailwind CSS, by specifying proper prefixes in front of classes. In this case, I have used prefix sm, which basically corresponds to the small screen width. As you can see, that navigation is not visible anymore. And just to know which breakpoint responsible for which screen width, we can navigate to the page responsive design in Tailwind CSS documentation. And here will be the list of all default breakpoints with their sizes. Of course, each of these breakpoints can be overwritten, but for our purposes, default sizes will work. The next thing that we are going to do is to decrease the size of this logo on mobile devices. So I'm going to use class size 8 instead of size 12. And the size 12 class will be activated on bigger screens. Same thing goes with this text for the logo. I'm going to use text XL size on mobile devices and 2XL on all other devices. And the distance between the logo and this text will be 1 unit instead of 2. And starting with bigger screens, the distance will be 2 units. Then let's get to adding this button, which is supposed to open up mobile navigation Of course, we have to find proper icon for this button, so let's open up Hero Icons website and look for an icon. I'm going to use this bars icon. Let's copy the SVG code and paste it into the appropriate place in our markup. So down here, right under navigation, I will create the wrapper for that button, and we're going to paste the markup of that icon right here. And by the way, the default size of this button, which is size 6, will work in our case. So let's keep this class. And then just to move this button to the very right side of the header, we're going to apply class justify between to this div wrapper. So both child elements of this div will be positioned as far as possible from each other. Then I'm going to add several classes to the header. We need this header to be fixed on mobile devices, and it also has to cover all available widths. So first of all, I'm going to decrease vertical paddings on mobile devices. I'll set it to 1.5. On all other screens, those paddings will be 4 units. The header will be fixed at the very top. And just to make this header stretch all the way from the left to the right of the screen, I'm going to use insetX0 class. And starting from bigger screens, the header will be static, meaning that it will be fixed only on mobile devices. Then I will increase the index just to have this header on top of all other elements on the page. The background color will be white, and then I will add border at the bottom, and this border should disappear on bigger screens. Alright, cool, the mobile header starts looking better. Let's also decrease size of the padding for container. So let's scroll up to the configuration of the container right here. As you can see, we're using 2 RAM paddings on all devices, but actually I will change this configuration and we'll use smaller padding on mobile devices. By default, I'm going to use 0.75 RAM units, and starting from bigger screens, I will use 2 RAM paddings. And right away we're seeing that paddings were drastically decreased. Now I'm going to comment out the rest of the content on this page, and then as we go and we'll work in individual sections of this page, we're going to comment in each section one by one. But for now, that is what we get. The mobile header is ready. And if we'll take a look at how this header looks on bigger screens, we notice that mobile navigation button appears, but it's supposed to be hidden on bigger screens. So let's add a couple of classes to this button. The paddings will be 2 units. On hover, the background color will be gray with a shade of 100. The corners will be rounded, and the margin from the right side will be negative 1.5. So the effect will be that this button will be shifted to the right side on 1.5 units. Actually, this button does not look good yet, because once we're gonna hover over this button, we'll see that it looks broken, and to fix it, I'm going to make the wrapper element flexible container by assigning class flex. And just to hide this button on bigger devices and keep it visible only on mobile devices, I'm going to add additional class with the prefix sm and hide this button by using class hidden, like so. So now this button disappears on all bigger screens, and it's only visible on mobile devices, just like we need to. And with that, we are finished working on mobile header. Let's continue working on the responsiveness of this page in the next lesson. Now we're gonna have to create markup for the mobile navigation. As soon as we click this button, this navigation should appear. So I'm gonna switch over to the editor and create markup for that navigation. I'm gonna put it inside this div, which already contains the button to open up this navigation. And just because this div will only be visible on mobile devices, this navigation is also going to be shown only on mobile. So for now, I'm going to add a couple of list items inside this navigation. And those items will be library as well as login link. And before proceeding with the markup, let's just take a look in the browser and make sure that those items appeared. Here they are. So let's continue adding classes to this now element. I need this now to be absolutely positioned at the very beginning of the page. I am assigning absolute class to absolutely position this navigation, and then we also need this navigation to stretch all the way from the left to the right side of the page. Then we're gonna also make the background color of this navigation white and add border from the bottom. Actually, we're not seeing anything just yet, and that is because I will have to remove this hidden class. This is not needed in this case. And now we're seeing that this navigation covers up the header, which we don't need, so I'm going to shift this navigation down so that header will be fully visible, and that is why I'm using class top full to shift this navigation by the distance, which will be equal to the height of the header. Now we're going to style individual list items in this navigation. So right here, let's add some paddings to those links. Then we'll decrease text size. The font will be semi-bold. We're also going to center the text around corners of these navigation links. And when hovering over these links, the background color should become gray with a shade of 100. Now I will apply a couple of classes to the list itself. I would like those list items to be positioned in the middle. So let's make this UL element flexible container where elements will be positioned vertically. Then let's align child elements in a center by using items center class. We'll set gap between child elements to 2 units. Horizontal paddings as well as padding from the bottom will be 3 units. But for now, as you can see, those links are not covering up all the available widths inside navigation. So let's just assign wfull class to the li element to make it stretch all the way from the left to the right of the page. Then we'll have to assign the same class wfull to the a element to make it as wide as the parent element. And just because a element is in line by default, in order to apply the width to this element, I'm gonna have to make this element inline block by using class inline block like so. And this time, if we're gonna hover over this link, we're seeing that it covers all available space inside the navigation just like we need. So I'm going to duplicate this navigation item with classes, paste it one more time to add another link inside navigation. And then we're gonna have to add one more link inside this navigation with different styles that will look like the button. So I will modify a couple of classes in here for the sign up link. For example, we'll make vertical padding 2 units, horizontal paddings will be 3 units, and background color of this button is supposed to be indigo with a shade of 600. And when hovering over this button, the color should become indigo with a shade of 100. We'll also apply color to the text inside this button. That will be indigo with a shade of 50. And now let's see how it looks like. And there we go. At this point our navigation is ready. In the next lesson we're going to make it appear only after clicking the menu button at the top right. Now there will be an interesting part, and that is we're gonna work on showing and hiding this mobile navigation when we're gonna click on the menu button. So eventually we're gonna get this result when we can easily hide or show this navigation. But first of all, we're gonna have to find another icon to close this navigation. Let's head over to Hero Icons website. I'm gonna search for Xmark icon, copy over the SVG code of this icon and paste it in the editor. So right here, right under the button to open up mobile navigation, I'm gonna create another button, paste the SVG code of the close icon, and we can apply the same set of classes just like we have applied to the button to open up navigation. So I'll copy over all these set of classes and paste it onto this link that will be used to close mobile navigation. And just because we're only using CSS in this playlist, which means we're not going to use JavaScript to make this mobile navigation appear or disappear Instead, we're gonna do the following. We'll be toggling the state of mobile navigation based on the target state of the navigation element, and for this I'm going to assign href attribute to this link, which is the button to open up mobile navigation. Soon we're gonna use this link, but for now, as you can see, 2 buttons are shown at once, which is not correct. So I'm gonna hide button to close mobile navigation for now by assigning hidden class to this link. And then we're gonna assign identifier to this navigation element with a value of now, the same value as we have used in here in this href attribute. And that allows us to assign some classes to this now element conditionally, only when this navigation is going to be in a target state, so to say. And that is going to happen only after when we're gonna click this link to open up mobile navigation, because this hash from the href attribute appears in the address bar of the browser, which will put that navigation in a target state. And by using this state, we can apply styles conditionally. For example, we're going to show this navigation only when it has target state, like this. So we're applying class block that will show this navigation if an identifier of this navigation will exist in the address bar of the browser. And that is going to happen after we're gonna click on this link to open up mobile navigation. And now let's try it out in a browser. Initially, we're not seeing mobile navigation, and there is also no now hash in the address bar of the browser. But once I'm going to click on this menu button, right away we're seeing that menu appears, and the hash now also shows up in the address bar. And once I'm gonna click on another link on this logo, which leads to the home page, it is going to erase that hash now from the address bar, and which is why the navigation is now closed. And that is basically how it's working, by using the target state of the now element. But how do we actually replace button to open up navigation with the button to close this navigation? And for that, I'm going to use special Tailwind CSS class called peer on the now element. Let's add it right here. And that is going to allow us to apply some classes conditionally to the element which comes right after this now element to which we have just added peer class. So once our peer element will be in the target state, meaning that when our navigation will be visible, we would like to hide the button to open up the navigation. And because of that, we are applying hidden class right here. So we are using peer target pseudo selector, which is only going to apply certain class when the peer element, in our case peer element is navigation, will be in a target state. And in our case, target state means when navigation is visible. And let's see if it works. If the hash now will be present in the address bar, we're going to see navigation, but the button to open up navigation will be hidden. So instead, what we're supposed to do in this case is to show button to close navigation. And to do that, we're also going to use the same pseudo class with a name peer target, because we only have to make sure when the peer element will be in the target state. And then we're using dynamic selector to select the next element which comes after this button to open up navigation. And the next element in our case is the button to close navigation. So we're going to make that button visible by applying class block under these circumstances. Once again, what using this class is going to cause is that when navigation will be in the target state, meaning that the navigation will be visible, we're going to select the next element that comes after this button to open up menu, which will be the button to close the menu, and we are assigning class block to make that button visible. And after applying all those classes, we're going to get the following result. When the navigation is hidden, the button to open up navigation is visible, and when the navigation is open, the button to open up navigation gets replaced with close button. So this is all working as we expect to. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Next one is this hero section, and that is what we are going to be making responsive in this lesson. So I'm going to switch over to the editor, and right here let's just uncomment everything first, and then comment out markup for the footer, as well as all other section inside the main tag, besides hero section. So this way we're gonna have header as well as the hero section uncommented. And for now, this is how the hero section looks like. I will start with modifying paddings from the top and bottom. So on other screens, this padding from the top will be 28 units, from the bottom 48 units, and for mobile devices we're going to make top padding 20 units and the bottom padding will be 10 units. Then the following two elements, such as heading as well as an image, should be positioned one under the other on mobile screens. So let's just apply FlexCall class to this wrapper and align elements in a center. The space in between heading as well as an image will be 8 units on mobile devices, but on all other devices we're going to position those elements in one row by using FlexRow class. And let's also increase the gap between these elements, set it to 12 units for bigger screens. For now, the text inside these headings is not positioned in a center, so let's apply items center class to this wrapper element. And we also have to apply text center to center the content itself within those heading blocks. And then on bigger screens, I'm going to reset this alignment and align everything at the beginning of this flexible container, and also will reset the text alignment, set it to left. As you can see now, the text of the heading as well as subheading are properly aligned in a center. Now I'm going to decrease the size of the main heading, set it to 3XL on mobile screens, and increase this size for all other screens, let's say 5XL. And also the spacing between the main heading and the subheading will be 2 units from the top on mobile devices, and on all other screens this spacing will be 4 units. We're going to increase font size of the subheading only on bigger screens. So let's use text LG with an SM prefix. I will also try to stick to my own convention and group all the classes within responsive prefixes together and move them to the end of the class list. Moving on, as for these two buttons, let's decrease the spacing from the top to the subheading. We will set it to 6 units, but on all other screens, this spacing will be 8 units. Paddings for buttons will also be decreased a little bit on mobile devices. Horizontal paddings will be 6 units, vertical ones will be 2 units, and on bigger screens, horizontal paddings will be 8 units, and vertical ones will be 3 units. Then I will increase font size of these buttons starting from bigger screens. And will round corners of these buttons on mobile devices, but not as much as on bigger screens. After this, I'm actually going to copy these new classes that we have added to this button and put them on the next button. So these classes will be pretty much the same, with an exception that those classes that are responsible for setting the background color as well as text color will be different. And finally, the last element inside this hero section is this image. On mobile devices, we're going to decrease the size of this element by 10%. But on bigger screens, let's do the opposite and increase the size by 10%. And also, as for this perspective, we're not going to use it on mobile devices and start applying it only on bigger screens. And finally, this class W2/3, which sets the width of this block, will not be applied on mobile devices, only on bigger screens. And finally, let's just take a look at the final result and see how hero section looks like on mobile devices. And this is it for this section. We will continue working on another section in the next lesson. The next section on our page, which comes after the hero section, is this features section. As you can see, all the elements in this section is aligned vertically. So let's switch over to the editor and uncomment this section. There it is. Let's go back to the browser and take a look how this section looks like on mobile devices initially. As you can see, it is completely broken. So let's start applying classes to the elements of this section one by one. First of all, I'm going to focus on these two headings. I'm going to set vertical paddings to 8 units on mobile devices for this section, and for all other devices, this padding will be 16 units. And as for this gap between child elements of this section, we'll set it to 12 on bigger screens. But on mobile devices, I'm going to set the distance between child elements to 8 units. Like so. And those child elements are the block with a heading and a subheading, and block with list of features. Let's also decrease the font size of the section heading, set it to 2XL on mobile devices, but on all other screens, we're going to increase the font size to 4XL. Let's also decrease the spacing between heading as well as subheading on mobile devices. I will use margin top 1, and for all other screens, this top margin will be 2 units. As for this text LG class, which increases font size, I will use it only on bigger screens. Next one, probably the most important change that we'll have to make regarding responsiveness when it comes to this section, is that we need to align all those feature items vertically. So let's switch back to the editor, and right here where we are applying grid class, we need to make this grid to have 3 columns only on bigger screens. But on mobile devices, this grid by default will have only 1 column. And the gap on mobile devices between those feature items will be 4 units, but on bigger screens, this gap will be bigger. We'll set it to 8 units. And that is looking good. All these features are now aligned vertically. Let's go back to the editor and decrease the roundness of these feature blocks on mobile devices. We will use rounded MD class for that, but on all other screen sizes, the roundness level will be XL, a little bit bigger. Also, I'm going to make paddings 4 units on mobile devices, but on bigger screens, we'll increase paddings to 6 units. And so, just because we have 3 identical feature cards inside this section, I'm going to copy over all those classes that we have just modified or added on the first feature block and apply them to all other cards in this section. And I will be also doing the same modifications that we have just done to the list of classes on the first card. And so far, here's how this section looks like. Next, I'll be applying classes to individual elements in these cards. For example, let's decrease the size of icons on mobile devices. In here, I'm going to apply size 10 class to set the width as well as height for an icon, and on bigger screens we're going to use size 12. And exact same classes I will be applying to other SVG icons inside this section. So I'm basically replacing all existing classes with new ones for all these icons. As for the headings inside these cards, let's decrease font size on mobile devices and make it bigger on all other screens. Then I will take these 2 classes and replace existing classes on these headings inside the other cards. Obviously, we want all those elements in each card look the same. There is one more element left inside these cards, and that is this description. For this description, I will decrease font size on mobile devices, but on bigger screens, I will be using the default size, which we can set by using class text base. To discard text SM class, used for mobile devices. Alright, one more time, I'm going to take this list of classes and go over every feature block inside this section and apply these classes on other description blocks. Here is the result that we got. Let's continue working on the responsiveness of this page in the next lesson. Alright, moving on to the next section on this page, and that is this newsletter section. Let's uncomment this section on the main page and take a look how this section currently looks like on mobile devices. As you can see, it looks not that bad already, but we can try to slightly improve it. For example, instead of showing up the label of the button, we can replace the label with an icon to save some space on mobile. And also we can make some elements of this section smaller, such as heading as well as subheading. So let's get going. First of all, I'm going to decrease the size of paddings from the top and from the bottom of this section. I'll set it to 8 units, and on all other screens this size will be 16 units. Also, I will make the distance between child elements in this section 8 units on all other screens, but for mobile devices I will use 6 units. And just like for all other sections where this heading as well as subheadings are used, I'm gonna apply same styles. For example, let's make the font size of the main heading to XL on mobile devices, and on all other screens I'm gonna increase this size to 4XL. Then let's make the space in between heading as well as subheading 1 unit by using empty1 class, and on all other devices this space will be 2 units. I'm also going to apply text LG class, which increases font size only for bigger screens. Moving on to the input field, I prefer to reduce the roundness level of corners of this input on mobile devices, and that is why I'm assigning rounded MD class, but for all other screens we're still going to use rounded LG. And also let's just reset the font size to the default one by using text base class, but on mobile devices we'll decrease the font size by using text SM class, like this. As for the button that sits right next to the input field, we're going to use horizontal paddings 6 units and vertical ones 2 units only for bigger screens, but for mobile devices we'll make those paddings a little bit smaller, such as horizontal paddings will be 4 units and vertical ones will be 1 unit. And then we will apply the same level of roundness for this button, just like we have applied to the input field by using a rounded MD class. And for all other screens I'm going to use rounded LG class to increase level of roundness a little bit. And then let's just move all these classes that use prefix SM to the very end of this list of classes. And the final result that we are getting looks like this. So as was said at the beginning of this lesson, I'm going to use an icon for the button instead of a label. So let's switch over to the Hero Icons website and find proper icon for that button. I'm going to use paper airplane. So let's copy over the SVG code of this icon, paste it in the editor. And right away I'm going to set the size for this icon by using size 5 class. And just because we need to show this icon only on mobile devices, I'm going to hide it by using hidden class on all other screens, like this. And just to be able to show the subscribe label on all other screens, I'm going to hide this label on mobile devices first by using hidden class, and then I will use inline class to apply display with a value of inline to this element to make it visible on all other screens. And that's pretty much it. The newsletter section was already pretty responsive from the beginning, so we didn't have to do much work to improve its responsiveness. In the next lesson we're going to work on the responsiveness of the last section on this page, which is the footer. Alright, let's get to work on the last section on the main page, which is a footer. I'm going to comment out the remaining commented markup in this file to make this footer visible, and let's take a look how this footer looks like. As you can see, it's kind of broken on mobile, so let's start working on its responsiveness. The first thing that I like to do is to decrease the paddings From the top and from the bottom, on mobile devices, I'll set paddings to 6 units. But on bigger screens, the top padding will be 10 units and the bottom one will be 8 units. Then we're gonna apply spacing between the main part of the footer as well as copyright text and set it to 8 units on other screens, but on mobile devices, we'll set this spacing to 6 units by using GapY6 class. And then as for the main content of the footer, we'd like to position elements within this footer vertically on mobile devices, and that is why I'm using flex call class, which sets flex direction property to column, and on all other screens, we want those elements to show up on the same line, which we can achieve by using class flex row with the prefix of sm. So this way we're basically overriding the property set by flex call class. And the spacing between child elements within this block will be 8 units on bigger screens and 10 units on mobile devices. Now let's get to work on this part, which wraps the logo with the text. So we want this text to stretch all the way to the right side, and also when we will try to hover over on an empty space, which is to the right side of the logo, the cursor changes, which means this part is still clickable, but we need to make clickable only the logo itself. So I'm going to apply a couple of additional classes to make this logo not to stretch in its parent container. Firstly, I will assign a couple of classes to the wrapper which wraps logo with the text. Let's position both of those child elements vertically and align them to the left side. And as for this maxW80 class, which sets maximum width to this container, we're not going to use this constraint on mobile devices, so let's add a sm prefix, so the max width is only going to take effect on bigger screens. Alright, cool. Now as you can see, the text is stretching all the way to the right side of the footer, and when I try to hover on an empty space to the right side of the logo, the cursor is not changing, so this area is not clickable anymore. Now let's decrease the spacing between this logo and the text at the bottom. I'm going to use 2 units from the top on mobile devices, but on the rest of devices, we'll make this top margin 4 units. And I also prefer to decrease the text size, set it to small on mobile devices, but on all other screens, we're going to reset this text size and use default one by using text base class, like this. Now we're going to position all these lists vertically, so let's switch over back to the editor and apply flex call class to this wrapper, which will basically make all child elements be positioned vertically, and then I will use 16 units as a gap between all child elements on all other screens, but on mobile devices this gap will be 2 times less, 8 units. And here I have also applied flex row class with the prefix of sm to basically reset the property set by flex call class, because on all other screens we want all those lists to be positioned on one row. Then we're going to make the spacing between list heading and the list itself 4 units on all other screens, and on mobile devices this spacing will be 3 units. And by the way, as you may have already noticed, that we're applying a couple of classes to this element which basically do the same thing, and that is text sm and text lg classes that are applying font size, so there is no need to apply those 2 classes at once. I'm going to remove one of them, for example text lg. Then we'll also decrease the gap between individual list items on mobile devices. I'm going to use GapY1 class, and for all other devices the gap will be 2 units. As for the font size of individual list item, we'll make it smaller on mobile devices, and on all other screens we'll reset this font size and we'll use default size by using class text base. And just because we are using several list items in this list, it makes sense to copy over all this list of classes and apply it to the rest of list items. Even more, we are using exact same list inside this footer 3 times. So behind the scenes, I have basically gone ahead and applied the same modifications to classes that we have just made to the classes of the first such list. And as you can see now, all those lists are looking identical. And lastly, I prefer to reduce top padding of this element on mobile devices. For example, let's use PT6 class instead of PT8. We will use PT8 only on bigger screens. And that's actually it. We have finished working on the responsiveness of the main page, and now we can check the final result. So on this page, we have header at the very beginning, then comes main section with 3 more subsections such as hero section, features section, and newsletter section, and at the very end we have footer section. In the next lesson we're going to move on to working on the responsiveness of another page. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. At this point we are done with the responsiveness of the main page for mobile devices. But when it comes to tablets, we can do better. So if I'm going to zoom out this page, we're gonna get the approximate result of the tablet screen. So let's just change a few things to make this page look better on tablet screens. Just like for mobile devices, I prefer this content to be positioned vertically on tablet screens. Firstly, these headings will come followed by an image. And by the way, just because we have already finished working on responsiveness of the header as well as the footer, and all pages in our project are going to have the same header and the footer, I have gone ahead and pasted markups of header and the footer on the rest of pages. So let's get back to index.html and start with modifying paddings for the main section. On mobile devices we'll make top padding 24 units, bottom padding will be 12 units, on tablet screens top padding will be 16 units, bottom padding will be 20 units, and finally on larger screens top padding will be 28 units and bottom padding will be 48 units. And then just to be able to position elements within the hero section vertically on tablet screens, I'm going to apply flex row class only for bigger screens. And then we're going to align headings on the left sides, also starting from bigger screens. Because on tablet screens, by default, those headings, main one as well as subheading, have to be positioned in the middle. Alright, cool. As you can see right now, heading as well as subheading are positioned in the middle on tablet screens. And the image has been shifted to the bottom, but we're gonna have to modify classes for an image wrapper a little bit, because I'd like this image to cover all available space on tablet screens. So we're only going to restrict the width of the wrapper container by applying W to search class only on large screens. And same goes with perspective. We're going to apply perspective for bigger screens, but for tablets there will be no perspective. And we're also going to scale an image by 10% only on bigger screens, so that on tablets as well as on mobile devices it will have the original size. Alright, cool. Next one is features section. We're also going to position all child elements within this section vertically. So that means we don't have to apply grid with 3 columns on mobile devices, only for bigger screens. So right here I'm going to use LG prefix for grid calls 3 class to apply 3 column grid only on bigger screens. And this gap 8 units will also be applied only on bigger screens. And there we go, all features are now positioned vertically. Next one is the footer. So this is how the footer has to look like on tablet screens. But for now, it looks like this. The first thing that I'm going to do in here is to position block with the logo and the project name, as well as those lists vertically inside the footer. So firstly, block with the logo will come, followed by lists. And to do so, we're going to apply flex row class to make those elements be positioned on the same row only for bigger screens, but for tablet screens as well as for mobile devices, those child elements will be positioned vertically. And we're gonna use gap 8 class also only on bigger screens. as you can see right now, this block doesn't take up all available widths. So to fix it, I'm going to apply width restriction only on bigger screens. So let's change this prefix to LG so that max W80 class will be used only on bigger screens. And this class restricts the width of this block. But on tablet screens, it will no longer be restricted. So as you can see right now, that block takes up all available widths. And with that, we're done working on the responsiveness of the main page for tablet screens. Let's just take one more quick look at the final result. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Now that we are done working on the responsiveness of the main page, it's time to go to the next page, which is playlists. The file responsible for this page, called playlists.html. Let's open it up in the browser. And I've already gone ahead and replaced markups of header as well as the footer on this page, so that those elements are responsive, because we have already finished working on responsiveness of those elements in previous lessons. Now we're going to fully focus on making this page responsive. Let's firstly tweak paddings of the main section. We'll use padding top 24 units, padding bottom 12 units. This is only applicable for mobile devices, but for bigger screens, we're going to use 16 units for vertical paddings, and the gap between child elements will be 8 units on mobile devices, but for bigger screens, we'll make this gap 12 units. Then we're gonna decrease the font of the main heading on mobile devices. It will be 4XL. For bigger screens, we'll increase this font and make it 5XL. Also, let's increase top margin of the subheading, set it to 3 units on bigger screens, and increase the font size of this subheading also on bigger screens, set it to text LG, and therefore we no longer have to use text LG class on mobile devices, because on mobile devices the font of this heading is supposed to be smaller. Alright, moving on now to this content. So we're going to position this content vertically on mobile devices. Let's just find the wrapper element that is responsible for that content. It's this one. As you can see, it contains 2 child elements. So on mobile devices, those 2 child elements should be positioned vertically, and that is why I'm going to apply grid calls 3 class only on bigger screens. Because on mobile devices we're supposed to have only 1 column, which will be used by default. Then we'll set the gap between child elements on mobile devices to 4 units, but for bigger screens, the gap will be 8 units. We're going to add prefix sm to callspan1 class. This is the element which wraps block with filters and input field. Let's also decrease the distance between input field and the block with text. Set it to 4 units for mobile devices, but for bigger screens, we'll increase the spacing up to 6. Alright, for now we're saying that this block does not take up all available widths yet. Let's fix it by adding grid calls 1 class to the wrapper element. That means on mobile devices, this grid will consist of 1 column, which will cover all available widths. And right away, I'm also going to decrease the size of the text heading on mobile devices and increase it for other screens by setting class text LG, like so. Next one, for each individual element of this list of text, we're going to reduce roundness level on mobile devices by simply adding rounded MD class to every list item, but for bigger screens I'm going to apply rounded LG class, which is going to increase roundness level. And just because we have several such elements on the page, let me copy all these classes and apply it on the rest of elements. So once it's done, let's switch over to these extension cards on mobile devices. Every card has to cover all available widths. So let's get back to the editor and change classes of this wrapper element. This wrapper contains all those extension cards. We're firstly going to decrease the space in between each individual card. On mobile devices, we'll set the gap to 2, but on bigger screens, the gap will be 4 units. We're also going to apply colspan1 class on mobile devices, but for bigger screens, we'll apply colspan2 class. In this way, all those extension cards will cover all available widths on mobile devices, but on bigger screens, each card will take up half of the space, and this way they will be displayed by 2 on each row on bigger screens. Actually, we also have to make this grid to have 2 columns only on bigger screens, and that's why I'm using SM prefix for grid cols2 class right here. Before moving on, let's just make sure that now we have only one extension card on each row. And that is exactly what we're seeing. Now let's style individual elements within these cards. First of all, I'm going to decrease the padding of these cards on mobile devices, as well as roundness level. So let's switch back to the editor, find the markup of the first card, which is represented by this article element, and here I'm going to apply P4 class to set paddings on mobile devices, and for all other screens we're going to increase this padding up to 6. Also, let's use SM prefix for rounded LG class, but for mobile devices we're gonna decrease roundness level by applying round MD class. As for the heading of each card, I'm going to increase the font size on bigger screens, but for mobile devices, the font size will be smaller. And I will also modify the font size of the subheading, reset it on bigger screens, and make it smaller on mobile devices. So now we can see the difference between the very first extension card and the next one. At least we can notice that paddings are reduced. So I have gone ahead and quickly copied and applied same classes on all other cards. And this way we are done with modifying styles for mobile devices. Now let's increase the width of the page a little bit and work on responsiveness for tablet screens. So for tablets, the first thing that I'm going to do is reduce the space in between headings as well as the main content. To do so, I'm simply going to change SM prefix to MD for gap Y12 class. So this class will be applied for screens that are bigger than tablet screens. And I would also like to position the main content on the page vertically. So we're only going to have one column in the grid. Let's change this SM prefix on MD to have 3 columns only on bigger screens. And also for bigger screens, we're gonna increase the horizontal space in between child elements within this grid and set it to 6. Now, I'm also going to apply MD prefix to colspan1 class right here, which is going to make this block with filters take up 1/3 of all available widths on bigger screens, and the distance between child elements, and in this case those child elements are an input field as well as wrapper with all the list elements. That gap will be 6 units on bigger screens. And just because this block with filters is going to take up 1/3 of the all available widths on bigger screens, the other block should take up the rest of space on bigger screens. So I'm going to use colspan2 class only for bigger screens. In other words, it is going to take 2/3 of all available space, because in total, within this grid, we have 3 columns. The first column takes up 1/3 of the space, and the other one takes up 2/3. In total, we get 3. Alright, cool, and just to see the result, I'm going to zoom out a bit, and at this screen width, we're seeing that filters as well as extension cards are positioned on the same row, just like we expect to. But I still prefer that at this screen width, we're still gonna get only one extension card per row. But before doing that, let's just change prefix for the gap y6 class right here to LG, so that this spacing will be applied on bigger screens, and this is the vertical spacing between an input field and the list with text. Okay, and just to have only one extension card per row on tablet screens, I'm simply going to change prefix for grid calls to class on LG. So we're only going to get 2 extension cards per row on bigger screens that are actually bigger than normal tablet screens. After doing this in the browser, on tablet screens, as you can see, we get only one extension card per row, but as I'm going to zoom out the page, as you can see now we're getting 2 extension cards per row. But I still think that we can arrange 3 extension cards per row on very large screens. Let's just tweak the main grid, which wraps block with filters as well as extension cards. On middle screens, this block will contain 3 columns, but on very large screens, the amount of columns will be 4. And the gap on very large screens is supposed to be 8 units. And obviously, this prefix should be changed to XL, which means extra large. And finally, just to arrange 3 extension cards on one row, let's apply grid calls 3 class on very large screens to the wrapper, which contain all extension cards. So this way we're gonna have 3 extension cards per row. And also this wrapper is supposed to take up 3/4 of the width of the parent element on extra large screens. And we are seeing the final result. On the very large screens, we have 3 extension cards per row, and as I'm going to zoom in the page, we'll reach tablet screens where we can see only 2 extension cards per row. And as I'm going to zoom in further, once we reach mobile device screen, all elements will be positioned vertically, and there will be only 1 extension card per row. So this is how our playlists page looks like on mobile devices. Link to the source code of this project, as always, will be in the video description. Let's open up the next page, playlist.html, and now we're gonna make it responsive. So eventually it is supposed to look like this. As I'm going to shrink browser window, we can see how all the content on this page is aligned vertically. Alright, we're going to start with modifying paddings for the main section, as well as making those headings a little bit smaller on mobile devices. I will open up playlist.html, and right here let's find the main section and assign a couple of classes. So we're going to make top padding 24 units, bottom padding 12 units. On bigger screens, vertical paddings will be 16 units, and the gap between child elements will be 12 units, but on mobile devices, that same gap will be 8 units. And then as for the main heading, we're going to decrease the font size on mobile devices to 4XL, and on bigger screens, the font size will be 5XL. Then let's increase the margin from the top for this subheading. On bigger screens, we'll use 3 units. For mobile devices, we'll keep this margin as 2 units, and let's also increase the font size of this subheading on bigger screens by applying text LG class with the prefix of SM like so. Let's switch over to the browser and check the result. Next one, we're going to position this content vertically. To do so, I'm going to add grid calls 1 class to the wrapper which contains all that content. It is this wrapper, so here I'm assigning grid calls 1 class because we want to have only 1 column on mobile devices. The distance between child elements will be 8 units. And we want this grid to contain 3 columns only on bigger screens, so I will have to add a SM prefix to grid calls 3 class. like so. So right now we're seeing how all that content is aligned vertically on mobile devices. Next one, I'm going to decrease the font size for the lessons heading as well as decrease the size of these icons. Let's jump back to the editor, and here for the lessons heading, I'm going to assign text LG class for bigger screens, and as for those icons, I'm going to use size 8 class on bigger screens, but on smaller screens on mobile devices, I'm going to use size 6 to make these icons a bit smaller. And then let's just take both of these classes and assign them to the next icon in here. Next one, I'm going to decrease the size of these list items. First of all, let's find the markup of those items in the editor. Right here we have 3 list items. So for the first one, I'm going to decrease the font size of this text by applying text SM class. And for bigger screens, we're going to reset this font size to default one by using text base class. And as for this other label which contains the lesson duration, we're also going to decrease the font size, make the font color gray with a shade of 500, and on bigger screens, we'll reset the font size back to default one. And just because we have 3 such list items, I'm going to copy over all those classes and apply them to the rest of elements. Moving on to next elements. So on mobile devices, I would like to reduce the gap between video player as well as this heading. And also we're going to decrease the level of roundness of this video player on mobile devices. Firstly, let's reduce the gap between video player and the heading by applying gap Y6 class in here, and for bigger screens we'll increase the gap to 8 units. And to reduce the roundness level of video player, I'm going to assign rounded MD class, and on all other screens I'm going to use rounded LG. Alright, cool. Next one, I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can see how this page looks like on tablet screens. And in here I prefer to decrease the space in between subheading as well as the main content, and also decrease the gap between the sidebar and the video player. So let's jump back to the editor. In here I will just change the SM prefix on MD for gap Y12 class, so this gap will be applied on screens that are a little bit bigger than normal tablet screens. And just to decrease the space in between the sidebar and the video player, I'm gonna have to change this prefix on MD. And actually on tablet screens, I still want this content to be positioned vertically. So one more time, let's jump back to the editor, find the wrapper which contains the sidebar as well as video player, and right here I'm going to change this prefix to LG. So we're only going to have 3-column grid on bigger screens. And this gap will also be applied on bigger screens only when we will have 3-column grid. And then as for the children of this grid, I want the first child to take up 1/3 of the width of the grid on bigger screens, and the second child is going to take up 2/3 of the width of the grid. So in total we're going to get 3, and that is exactly the size of our grid. Alright, let's take a look at the final result. On tablet screens, we're still seeing how the content is positioned vertically, just like on mobile devices, but as I'm going to zoom out and reach widths of bigger screens, the content will be positioned horizontally because 3-column grid will be applied. We can also take a look at this page from the distance. This is how it looks like on tablet screens, and this is how it looks like on mobile devices. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. The next page that we're going to make responsive will be a register page. So let's open up the template of this page in a browser. And actually there is not much to do when it comes to responsiveness, because this page will look almost the same on mobile devices just like on desktops. As you can see, as I'm going to shrink browser window, the block with registration form is going to stretch all the way and cover all available widths. So firstly, I'm going to open up the template of this registration page in the editor. The file is called register.html. And then I'm going to zoom in this page in the browser, and let's decide from where we're going to start. Alright, I'm going to apply 100 pixel widths to this card with the form and decrease the distance between the logo and the card itself. So to make that card to cover all available widths, I'm assigning wfull class to this section element, and to reduce the gap between the logo and the card itself, I'm going to apply gap y4 class, but on bigger screens, the gap will be a little bit bigger. We'll increase it to 6 units. Then the size of the logo itself will be 16 units on bigger screens, but it will be smaller on mobile devices. I will use size 14 for that. And just to have a little bit more space around the registration form on mobile devices, I'm going to add paddings, 3 units. Actually, registration form is not stretching all the way to cover 100% of the width of its parent. So to make it work as we expect, I'm going to add wfull class to the card element right here. And the restriction to the width we're only going to apply on bigger screens. So this class W96 applies maximum particular widths, but only on bigger screens, since we have used SM prefix with this class. Paddings of the card with registration form are also going to be smaller on mobile devices, 4 units, and on bigger screens I will increase those paddings up to 6 units. So roundness level of this card will also be different. We'll use medium roundness level for mobile devices, and let's make the roundness large on all other screens. Now, as for all those individual form fields within this form, I prefer to reduce the gap between those form fields on mobile devices. So right here, let's assign gap y4 class, and the gap will be bigger on all other screens. For form field labels as well as fields themselves, I'm going to decrease the font size on mobile devices by applying text SM class to this label first, and on all other screens we'll reset the font size back to the default one by using text base class. And the same modification we're going to do to the field itself. So in here I'm assigning text SM class to decrease the font size on mobile devices, and on all other screens we're going to reset the font size by using text base class with prefix of SM. Roundness level of those input fields will also be different. On mobile devices I'm going to use rounded MD class, and roundness LG class will be used on bigger screens. And since we have 3 such input fields on a page, I'm going to copy over the classes of the label from the first input field and apply them to the rest of labels. And the same thing I'm going to do with classes of the input field itself. Let's also take all these classes and paste them onto other input fields. And that is looking good so far. Same modifications I'm going to do to this button. So we're gonna decrease font size on mobile devices by using text SM class and reset this font size on bigger screens. Then roundness level will be medium on mobile devices and large on bigger screens. And also we're applying in here margin top 2 units, but I'm going to make this margin smaller on bigger screens by using MT1 class. And finally, the last element on this page is this label with a link. So for mobile devices, I'm basically going to decrease the spacing from this label to the submit button by applying MT6 class, and on bigger screens, we're going to override MT6 class with MT8 class to make the margin bigger. And that's actually it. We have done all necessary modifications to make this page responsive, and just because we have another page, login.html, which is almost the same, I have gone ahead and applied the same modifications to the login HTML template. So login page is also responsive. And with that, we have finished working on the responsiveness of registration and authentication pages. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Now that we have all our pages in the project responsive for mobile devices, it's time to start working on the dark theme. So eventually, after applying the dark theme, we're about to get something similar to this page. And let's get started. I'm gonna open up the template of the main page in the editor. It is called index.html, and right here I'm going to apply a couple of additional classes to the header. But this time I'm going to use those classes with the prefix of dark, and this tells Tailwind that those classes have to be applied only when the dark theme will be active. So in here I'm basically removing the border of this header and making the background color of the header gray with a shade of 900 when the dark theme will be active. And if we'll take a look at the result in a browser, sure enough we're going to see that our header has become dark. And that is because I currently have the dark theme activated in my operating system. Otherwise, those classes with the prefix of dark will not be applied. So basically, Tailwind determines whether it has to apply dark theme based on operating system preferences. But we can also change this strategy and only apply dark theme when the particular class will be present on one of the HTML elements. So I'm going to use manual strategy to decide whether we want dark theme to be applied or not. And to do so, I will add top level key inside this configuration object with the name dark mode and the value of selector. And after this in the browser, we're not going to see an effect of applying those classes with the prefix of dark, because now the light theme is active. And to enable dark mode, all we have to do is to add class with name of dark to one of the HTML elements. Usually this class is applied to the root element. And this way, if we'll be applying classes with the prefix of dark to all descendant elements, all those styles applied by the classes with the prefix of dark will take effect. And of course, now in the browser, we are about to see that our header has become dark again, since we have activated dark theme. Now let's just style the rest of elements within this header properly, so all of them will look good when the dark mode is active. I'm going to make the logo white by applying text white class to the SVG element right here. And I will apply the same class to the name text white with the prefix of dark. And there we go, our logo and the text are white now. Next one, we'll have to make those now items visible. So let's jump back to the editor, find the markup of each now item, and right here I'm going to apply light gray color to those elements, and when hovering over those now items, the color should become indigo with a shade of 200, only when dark mode is active, and that is why we're applying two prefixes at the same time to this class, dark as well as hover. So let's just take those two classes and also apply them to the next now item, since both of those now items are supposed to have the same styles. Alright, the header looks much better now, but we're not done yet, because we also have mobile version of this navigation. Let's get to work on this one. First of all, I'm going to make this button to toggle navigation visible. That button is represented by the link tag in our markup, and I'm going to apply bggray 700 class to this element only when hovering over this element and when dark mode will be active. Next one, I'm going to make the icon within this button white by using text white class. After this, I'm basically going to copy over those two classes we have just applied to the button to open up mobile navigation and move them onto the button to close mobile navigation right here. So basically the way it works is that there can only be one button visible at a time. And now opening button as well as closing button both look good when the dark mode is active. Next one, I'm going to change the background color of mobile navigation. So right here, to this now element, let's add a few classes such as border 0 and BG gray 900. This way we are removing border and making background color gray with a shade of 900 when the dark mode will be active. And then as for individual now items, I'm going to make text color gray with a shade of 200. And when hovering over those now items, the text color should become gray with a shade of 700 when the dark mode is active. So let's just take these two classes and apply them also to the next now item right here. It's time to check the final result. So this is how mobile navigation looks like when the dark mode is active. And that's how main navigation looks like with dark shades. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Let's continue applying dark styles to the elements on the main page. The next element is this hero section. So right here, I'm going to change the background color of this section on dark gray. Let's open up index.html and apply dark color to the whole body element. Right here, I'm going to use BG gray with a shade of 800. Next one, there is this reflection right behind this image. We'll need to change the color of this reflection. The element responsible for showing up this reflection has a class of hero reflection in the markup. As you can see here, we don't have any classes because we're applying classes to this element by using apply directive right here and basically combining several classes into one with this directive. And all I have to do to override classes of the gradient is I will add a couple more classes. So from gray 700 is going to override the starting color of the gradient, and to gray 500 is going to override the ending color of this gradient. So we're basically making this gradient gray. And when the dark mode will be active, these two classes are basically going to take precedence over these two classes that apply colors to the gradient when the light theme is active. And as you can see, color of that reflection is changed. Next one, I'm going to apply white color for the text of this block. Right here, let's add text white class with the prefix of dark. And just to make the gradient color that is applied to VS Code word look better when the dark theme is active, I'm going to override gradient colors by applying the following classes from purple 300 and to indigo 300. This way gradient is going to start with purple color and end with indigo color. And the color of the subheading will also be different. When the dark theme is active, I'll make it gray with a shade of 200. And that's actually all what I was planning to do to make this section dark. We can move on to the next one, section with features. The first thing that I'm going to change is actually background color as well as color of the heading and subheading. And later on we'll be working on styles of individual feature cards. But before, let's apply background color to the features section. I will use BG Gray 700 class for it, and then we'll make color of the main heading white by using text white color, and the color of the subheading will be gray with a shade of 200. Now let's see what we got in the browser before moving on to the feature cards. Alright, cool, that looks good. Let's start working on the first card. For this one, I'm going to make border color indigo with a shade of 400 only when hovering over the feature card, and when the dark mode is active, also the background color of the card will be gray with a shade of 800 when the dark mode is active. And finally, I'm going to make border color black. For the icon that is contained within this card, I will change the color on indigo with a shade of 400. and the heading of this card will be white. And we'll make feature description gray with a shade of 400. After this, let's take a look at the result that we got, and if everything looks good to us, we can basically copy over those styles that we have just applied to the first card and apply them to the rest of cards. And after doing that, we're going to get the following: all those cards look identical. So at this point, we can say that we have finished working on the dark version of this section as well. Let's move on to the next one, newsletter section. For this newsletter section, there is not much to change at all. We'll basically have to change color of the heading as well as subheading and tweak styles of the input field. Firstly, I will apply text white class to the heading of this section. Text color with a shade of 300 will be applied to this subheading. And then we're gonna apply a bunch of additional classes to the input field to make it look good when the dark theme is active. Right here, let's apply ring indigo 400 to the input element to make the outline indigo when focusing this input field. And of course, since this class has to be active when the dark mode is active, we're using dark prefix along with the focus at the same time. Next one, I will make background color of this input gray with a shade of 700. Completely remove border, make text color white. And additionally, we'll also modify the color of the placeholder that we can do by using placeholder variant. And this is it for this section. And finally, let's start working on the footer styles. As the first thing, I'm going to assign gray background color with a shade of 900 to this footer element. The text that is within the footer will be gray with a shade of 400. After that, I'm going to change the color of all these list items by assigning text gray 400 class to the first one, and then take this class and assign it to the rest of list items. And just because we have 3 such lists within the footer, I'm going to go through each list and apply the same set of classes to all list items. And all that is left to do after that will be to change the text color of the copyright text as well as the color of this border. So to change the color of the copyright text, I'm going to use text gray 400 class, and to apply border color, I'm going to use border gray 800 class. And eventually we have achieved the final result. We have completely turned styles of the main page into dark styles. The page also looks good on tablet screens, as well as mobile devices. Link to the source code of this project will be as always in the video description. Let's move on to the next page, playlists.html. I'm gonna open this page in a browser. And now let's take a look at the final result that we are about to get after applying the dark theme. So just because we already applied dark theme to the header as well as the footer, I have gone ahead and replaced markup of header and the footer with the markup that already contains dark styles. So we wouldn't have to apply dark styles to header and footer over again. Now let's start working on the dark theme for this page. First of all, I'm going to enable dark theme for playlists page by adding dark mode class within this Tailwind CSS configuration object with a value of selector. And then to enable this theme, I'm going to add class dark to the root element of this page right here. And as usual, let's start with applying dark background to this page as well as make those headings white. I'm going to add bg gray 800 class to the body element to make background dark. And then let's scroll down, and here I'm going to apply text white to make the main heading white, and to the subheading let's apply text gray 300 to make the color light gray. And now that we are done with that, it's time to apply some classes to the input field. We're going to make this field dark when the dark theme is active. So I will scroll down to this input field right here, and let's start applying classes. The first class that I'm going to add will be ring indigo 400. That is going to make color of the outline of this field indigo with a shade of 400, but only when this field will be in focus and when the dark theme will be active. Next one, I'm going to make background color dark gray and border will be removed. The text color will be white and placeholder color will be gray with a shade of 400. There is also this heading right here, which we're about to make white. And if we'll jump back to the browser, we can see the result. Next one, let's apply a couple of classes to the elements of this list. So in here, let's find the first list item, and I'm going to make the color of those list items gray with a shade of 300. And when hovering over those list items, the background color has to change on gray with a shade of 700. And just because we have a bunch of such elements on this page, I'm going to do global search. We'll take the list of these classes and replace the rest of classes on other such elements with this list. And after doing this replacement, we can see how all those list items now have proper styles when the dark theme is active. Next one, let's apply classes to this individual card. And after we are done with that, we're going to basically copy over all those classes and apply them to the rest of such cards on the page. Let's find the markup of this card. It is represented by this article element. So right here, I'm going to make the border color indigo with a shade of 400, but only when the hover state will be active. The background color of this card will be gray with a shade of 700, and the border color will be black. The heading color will be white, and the description of the card will be gray with a shade of 400. And lastly, we also have a couple of texts at the bottom of this card. I'm going to change the background color of those texts on indigo with a shade of 600, and the text color within those texts will be indigo with a shade of 50. And then let's take these two classes and apply them to the second tag as well. And after doing that, we can take a look at the final result. Here is how the extension card looks like when the dark theme is active. And I'm going to quickly take all those classes that we have just applied and apply them to the rest of cards, so that eventually we're going to get such result. And with that, we're done working on the dark theme for the playlists page. In the next lesson we'll continue, and the link to the source code of this project will be in the video description. Moving on to the next page, which is called playlist.html. Here's the result of applying the dark theme to this page. And let's get to work. I'm gonna open up the template of this page in the editor. And the first thing that we have to do is to enable dark mode by applying a class called dark to the root element and by adding top level key with the name of dark mode to the Tailwind CSS configuration object with the value of selector. Right away I'm gonna change background color of the whole page by applying BG Gray 800 class to the body element. And as a next step, we're going to update colors of the heading with the subheading. We'll make them white. So let's jump back to the editor and apply text white class to the main heading and text gray with a shade of 300 to the subheading. There is also another heading with a text of lessons. To this one we will also apply a text white class to make the font color white. And down here we have a couple of icons. I'm going to update colors of those icons as well. So the color of those icons will be gray with a shade of 200, and when hovering over those icons the color will be indigo with a shade of 300. And now let's take these two classes and apply them to the next such icon right here. Let's take a look at the page, and there we go. We have these two icons gray, and when hovering over on those icons, the color will be light indigo. Now we're going to update styles of this list of lessons. So the active list item has to be gray, and the rest of such list items are going to a gray background color only when hovering over on them. So let's find the first list item in the markup, and here I'll start with applying bg-gray 700 class to this element to make background color gray with a shade of 700. Then we'll make text color gray with a shade of 300, and when hovering over this list item, the background color will be gray with a shade of 700. So basically the color will stay the same for the active list item as in normal state. But then we're gonna take these two classes without bg-gray 700 and apply them to the rest of list items, so that those list items are going to have gray background only when hovering over those list items. Let's jump back onto the page and take a look at the result. As you can see right now, we have proper styles applied to this list. And the only element that is left to modify in this page to make it look good when the dark theme is active is this heading along with the text. And just because we're using Tailwind CSS plugin called typography to apply styles to this text, by applying this prose class, which basically allows us to apply styles to several elements at once within a particular container, and following the same principles, I'm going to use the following classes to customize styles of all paragraph elements within this container by applying text gray 300 class. And in the same way, I'm going to change the color of all H3 elements within this container by applying text gray 200 class, like so. Once again, those prefixes prose p and prose H3 are unique ones provided by typography plugin. They are not part of Tailwind CSS. And with that, we have finished working on the dark theme for this page. There are a couple more pages left in this project that we still have to make dark. We're gonna do so in the next lesson. In this final lesson, we're going to apply dark theme to the registration as well as authentication pages. So I will open up template of the registration page in the editor. It is called register.html. And the first thing, as we usually do to apply dark theme, is we'll have to add dark class to the root element. And then let's also add dark mode key inside Tailwind CSS configuration object with the value of selector. And now I will make the background color dark gray by applying bg-gray 800 class to this body element. And then let's also make the logo on the page white when the dark theme will be active by applying text white class to this SVG element. Alright, cool, that's a good start. Next one, I'm going to make the card itself dark. That is going to look like this. Let's jump back to the editor and apply the following classes to this element. I'm going to make background color gray with a shade of 900. The border color will be completely black, and there will be no shadow. Let's remove the shadow by applying class shadow none. And then we'll start modifying classes of the label and the input field. We'll do that for the first input field, and then we'll just copy all those classes and apply them to the rest of input elements on this page. So I'm going to make label gray with a shade of 300. And as for the input field, let's make the outline indigo with a shade of 400 when this input field will be in focus. Background color will be gray with a shade of 700. We'll also remove the border, make text white, and placeholder color will be gray with a shade of 400. And that is looking good. Now I'm gonna copy classes of the first label and apply them to the rest of labels. And the same thing I'm going to do with the classes applied to the first input field. We will also apply them to the rest of inputs on the page. And after doing this, we're going to get the following result. We will not do anything to this button because it already looks good when the dark theme is active. And as for this text, I'm going to make it lighter by using text gray 300 class right here. And for this login link, let's change color on indigo as a shade of 400. And when hovering over this link, the color will become indigo as a shade of 300, a little bit lighter. And I think it is looking good. At this point we can stop. And just because authentication page is pretty similar to registration page, I have already applied the same classes of the dark theme to authentication page, so eventually it looks like this, just like registration page. And with that we have finished working on all the pages of this project. In addition, we have also made each page responsive and applied dark theme to every page. And by the way, to easily toggle between dark and light theme, all we have to do is to remove or add dark class to the HTML element, and as you can see, theme changes. When the dark class is present, the dark theme will be active, otherwise the light theme will be active. And this is it. Link to the repository of the finished source code of this project will be in the video description.